It was one of those strange nights. The kind where everything feels out of place, but you can't quite explain why. I was on night patrol, something that had become routine, driving down a deserted road, not a car in sight, with nothing but the sound of the engine and the soft murmur of the radio. It was the kind of solitude that accompanied me at that hour. The road I was driving on was isolated, a route hardly used after dark. During that part of the shift, the main thing that worried me was boredom. No incidents, nothing out of the ordinary. Just the dark asphalt disappearing under the beams of the headlights, the tall trees on either side, and the deep darkness that seemed to swallow everything ahead. It was around 2 a.m. when the radio crackled. I could hardly believe it when I heard the call. A driver was reporting something completely out of the ordinary. He said that while driving down the same road, he had seen a man dressed as a clown, standing by the roadside. The detail that caught my attention immediately was that the clown was holding a knife and smiling in a sinister way. Now, if you've worked in the police for long enough, you've heard it all. From hysterical people calling about shadows to pranksters trying to mess with the patrol officers. Honestly, my first reaction was skeptical. Who in their right mind would be dressed as a clown in the middle of the night, on the side of a deserted road, holding a knife? It screamed prank, but protocol is protocol, and I had to investigate. I sped up a bit, focusing on the edges of the road. The trees were dense, and the only light came from the car's headlights. The silence was heavy. As I approached the location the driver had described, I became more alert, and then I saw it, a flash of color in the darkness. There he was, exactly as the driver had described. A man, dressed in a clown costume, standing by the roadside. The face paint glowed slightly in the reflection of the headlights. The strangest thing was that he wasn't doing anything. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there holding that knife and wearing that stupid grin. I stood still for a moment, processing the scene. It wasn't something you expect on a routine patrol. I got out of the car, pulling out my flashlight, and started walking toward him. The knife's blade reflected the light of my flashlight as I approached. He still didn't move, didn't seem scared or inclined to run. But then, without warning, he turned and ran into the woods. Just like that. One moment he was there, and the next he was disappearing among the trees. Damn, I muttered, running after him, more out of reflex than anything else. The forest was dense, and it didn't take long for me to realize that it would be impossible to follow. The trees formed a maze of shadows, and aside from the sound of my own footsteps, I heard nothing else. He had completely vanished. I stood there for a few minutes, all my senses on high alert, hearing only the wind rustling through the leaves. It didn't make sense. Why would he run like that? What was he doing out here? I thought about searching more, but knew it would be pointless. He was probably long gone by now. I headed back to the car, feeling a deep unease settle in. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on what. It all seemed so surreal, yet I knew it had been real. I had seen that clown. He was there, flesh and blood. I drove back along the road, trying to shake the unease. Maybe it was just some nutcase. Maybe it was just some stupid prank from a group of comedians. About 30 minutes passed since the clown disappeared. I was heading back to the city, convinced it was nothing more than a dumb joke. But then, the radio crackled again. It was the same driver. He sounded more scared this time. He said the clown was back. But now, he wasn't standing by the roadside. He was standing in the middle of the road. And from the description, he was right up ahead of me. I sped up a bit, and it didn't take long before I saw him again. This time, he was in the middle of the road just as the driver had said. I stayed there for a few seconds, trying to figure out what this guy wanted. I got out of the car, more annoyed than worried, and started approaching him. But he didn't move. He just stood there holding the knife, still with that grin plastered on his face. What bothered me wasn't the knife or the smile, but the way he looked at me, like he was waiting for something. I told him to drop the knife, but he didn't react. I kept getting closer, but then he muttered something. I couldn't hear well at first, so I got closer. "I've been here the whole time," he said in a low, raspy voice. That's when I felt something strange. It wasn't just him there. I noticed, out of the corner of my eye, something moving among the trees. When I turned my head, I saw what it was. More clowns, standing among the trees, just watching me. At least 4 of them, all with those twisted grins, like they were enjoying the situation. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't fear. It was something worse. It was the feeling of being surrounded and not knowing how to react. With my heart pounding, I took a few steps back, not taking my eyes off the clown in front of me. But he didn't move. He just stood there grinning as if he knew something I didn't. When I finally could move, I turned around and ran back to the car. I got in, locking the doors automatically, and sped off as fast as I could. The sound of the engine cutting through the silence of the road was the only thing keeping me focused. But I couldn't shake that image from my head. They were there, watching me, waiting. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and I swear on everything holy, I saw them running after the car. It wasn't natural. They didn't run like normal people. Their bodies moved in a strange way, almost like they were being pulled by some invisible string. I sped up, my hands sweating on the steering wheel. The car's headlights lit up the road ahead, but my mind was fixated on the rearview mirror. Every time I looked back, I saw those grins getting closer. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I made it back to the city. The radio was silent, and the road now felt more familiar. But something inside me had changed. Something was off. I parked the car in front of the station and just sat there, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I knew that no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't report what I'd seen. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. I never went back to that road at night. And every time I see a picture of clowns, that grin comes back to my mind. A grin I'll never forget. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. I've been a cop for 17 years, and I've seen a lot of strange things, but I always managed to find an explanation. At least until that case at the farm. It was one of those places in the middle of nowhere, one of those old properties that most people forget even exists. I was called to investigate the disappearance of an entire family. The report came from a neighbor, one of those who lived miles away. He said he hadn't seen the family in months and couldn't reach them by phone, so he thought it was odd. There were no signs of life anywhere. When I arrived at the property, something felt off right away. The farm looked normal enough, but the silence was heavy. No wind, no sound of animals, nothing. Just that thick, suffocating silence that makes you feel like something's not right. I walked into the house, expecting to find some clue as to why the family had vanished. What I wasn't ready for was what I was about to see. Inside, the house was too perfect, immaculate, everything in its place, like someone had just finished tidying up. But there was a strange smell in the air, a mix of incense and burnt meat. It was strong, the kind of smell that makes you want to leave as fast as possible. As I moved through the rooms, I started noticing strange symbols on the walls, drawn with a reddish paint. It was blood, and it didn't take me long to figure that out. The symbols were disturbing, something I'd never seen before. They were everywhere. Each wall seemed to tell some dark story I couldn't fully understand. Then I got to the basement, and that's when things really got dark. Down there, I found a room that looked like an altar. In the center were 5 lit candles, each one with a family photo underneath. All the pictures were covered in blood. The air down there was thick, almost suffocating. I felt a pressure in my chest, but I kept going. I needed to figure out what had happened. While looking around, I saw a diary on the altar. When I opened it, I realized it belonged to the family patriarch. The first few pages seemed normal. He talked about life on the farm, about his wife and kids. But as I read on, the tone changed. He started talking about a cult he had come across. Said they promised spiritual protection, but the rituals were dark, grotesque. The diary described disturbing details about human sacrifices. He wrote about offering things up to guarantee the family's safety and kept mentioning the idea of becoming one in the other plane. The last entry was the most chilling. Tomorrow at midnight, we will all be together on the other plane. After reading that, I knew I needed to get out of there. I went back to the car to report what I'd found. But when I turned on the police radio, it started playing a song, except I hadn't touched the frequency. It was a soft, feminine voice humming a lullaby. The kind of sound that makes your skin crawl. I shut off the radio, but the voice didn't stop. I looked in the rearview mirror, and my heart almost stopped. The family was there, standing at the door of the house. All of them. The father, mother, the two kids, just staring at me. But the worst part was the look in their eyes. There was no life there, just these empty faces watching me while I tried to stay calm. I floored the gas and got out of there as fast as I could. When I came back with backup, the farm looked different. The smell of incense and burnt meat was gone, and the house, it was completely empty. No more symbols on the walls, nothing. Not even the photos or the diary were there. It was like I had imagined everything. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. That family, they didn't disappear. They're trapped there, somehow. And to this day, no one's heard from them again. This case still haunts me, because no matter how hard I try, I can't forget those faces watching me from the doorway. I had always heard the stories about the woman in white at the station. It was the kind of thing the veterans would tell to scare the rookies, especially during night shifts. Watch out for the mountain road, they'd say. If you see the bride, you're in trouble. The legend was that, years ago, a bride died in an accident on that road, on her way to her own wedding. Ever since, her spirit wandered there, waiting for someone to take her back to the altar. But no one who crossed her path made it out alive. It all seemed like nonsense, of course. I never believed those stories. Until that night. It was a quiet shift, almost boring, and I was patrolling the mountain road alone. It was cold, and the fog was heavy, making the road even more dangerous than usual. I was driving slowly, with the headlights on full, trying to see anything ahead. Suddenly, in the middle of the fog, something white appeared in front of me. A woman. I slammed on the brakes and nearly lost my breath. She was standing right in the middle of the road, wearing a long wedding dress. Her veil covered her face, and she seemed to float more than walk. I stared for a few seconds, trying to understand what was happening. Could it be some sort of prank? Maybe a local woman with a screw loose? I rolled down the window and shouted, "Ma'am, are you okay?" Nothing. No response. She just kept walking, slowly, as if she were lost. I got out of the car with a flashlight, even though every cell in my body was screaming at me to stay put. "Hey, do you need help?" I called out again. The woman stopped for a second, but didn't turn around. A chill ran down my spine, and then, out of nowhere, she just vanished into the fog. Disappeared like she was never there. I looked around, stunned. There was nowhere she could have gone. No trails or houses nearby. Just trees, cliffs, and more fog. I got back into the car, still trying to process what I'd just seen. That's when things got really weird. As soon as I sat down, a strong smell of wet earth filled the air. It was strange because the car had been completely dry and clean until then. I glanced at the passenger seat, and my heart skipped a beat. It was soaked, as if someone had just walked through a storm and sat down. I swear I started hearing breathing coming from the back seat. Instinctively, I looked in the rearview mirror and nearly had a heart attack. The woman was sitting in the back seat, her veil still covering her face. I couldn't see anything, but I knew she was staring at me. I blinked, and when I looked again, the seat was empty. She had disappeared once more. I was shaking, my hands sweating on the steering wheel. Without thinking twice, I started the car and floored it. Every curve felt tighter, and the dense fog only made the sensation worse, like I wasn't going to make it off that road. It felt like the road itself wanted to keep me there. The fear was taking over, but I couldn't stop. I just wanted to get out of there. The next morning, I couldn't shake off what had happened. Even though I didn't want to talk to anyone, I ended up telling the other officers. Of course, they looked at me like I was losing it, but they agreed to go back to the spot with me just to check it out. And off we went. When we got there, we saw tire marks on the road, as if someone had braked hard, probably mine from the night before. But as we followed the marks, we found something no one expected. Down in a ditch, covered in overgrowth, was an old car, almost completely swallowed by the vegetation. We climbed down, and what we found made my stomach turn. In the driver's seat, still strapped to the wheel, was a woman wearing a wedding dress, already in an advanced state of decomposition. She looked like she'd been dead for decades. It couldn't be, but somehow, I knew it was her. The bride from the road. At that moment, it all made sense. The legend, the stories. It wasn't just superstition. I had seen her spirit, and somehow, she was still there, trapped in that endless cycle, seeking revenge or maybe redemption. It was one of those quiet nights, not much going on. I was in the patrol car, parked near the main square. I had been on the job for years. Nothing surprised me anymore. I'd seen it all. Home invasions, bar fights, even some weird rituals that some wannabe goth kids would pull every now and then. But that night, the radio broke the silence in a way that made my skin crawl. 911. What's your emergency? The operator's voice came through the speaker. On the other end, a woman's voice, low, almost inaudible, but enough to make me pay attention. Please, I'm trapped. They're coming for me. I'm in the basement, at the Forgotten House. Forgotten House? That made me sit up. Everyone in town knew about that place. An abandoned house, falling apart, in the middle of nowhere. The last person to live there died decades ago, a reclusive old lady, and no one had set foot in there since. I thought it might be a prank, or maybe someone had broken into the house and was trying to mess with me. But being the only cop on duty that night, I had to check it out. I started the patrol car and followed the dirt road leading to the Forgotten House. The road to the house was so deserted it felt like I was driving out of the world. The full moon lit the way, but not enough to shake that weird feeling that something was off. When I finally saw the house, it looked even more abandoned than I remembered. Completely covered in dust, cobwebs stretching across the windows. Nothing had been touched for years. I parked the car, got out with my flashlight in one hand and the other close to my belt where my gun was holstered. I walked slowly toward the front door, which was slightly ajar, creaking in the soft breeze. The old wood looked ready to collapse at any moment. Inside, I swept the room with a flashlight. Everything was covered in thick dust, but something caught my eye. Marks on the floor, like someone had walked through recently. Police! I yelled, my voice echoing through the empty house. Anyone here? No response. I decided to go down to the basement. The stairs leading down to the basement were narrow and creaked with every step. When I reached the bottom, a strange cold settled over me. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones. I shined the flashlight around, revealing dirty, cracked walls. And that's when I saw it. The scratches. Deep gouges in the concrete, like someone had clawed at it for days. I got closer, inspecting them. Some bits of fingernails were still lodged in the scratches. The air felt heavier down there, and my heart started racing. Then I heard it. You shouldn't be here. The woman's voice, clearly coming from behind me, but no one was there. I whipped the flashlight around, breathing heavily. Nothing, just silence and the echo of my own breath. My first instinct was to get out of there. I rushed up the stairs toward the door, but before I could reach it, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I ran to it, trying to open the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. What the hell is this? I muttered to myself, yanking the door with all my strength. Nothing. I tried the radio to call for backup, but all I got was static and strange crackling noises. That's when the voice started again. You shouldn't be here, the woman repeated, this time closer, like she was right beside me. I turned abruptly, and what I saw made me freeze. A shadow, something without a clear shape, but it seemed to be moving toward me. Every instinct screamed for me to run. But where? I was trapped. The radio kept hissing, and the static grew louder, filling my ears with an unbearable buzzing. The flashlight flickered and died. When it came back on, the basement was empty. The shadow was gone. I started shouting, banging on the door, kicking it, and even firing shots from my Glock 19, trying anything to get out of there. My screams echoed, but it felt like no one could hear me. The last thing I remember before everything went black again was the voice. Now, whispering in my ear, now you're part of this. Days later, the search team arrived at the house. They didn't find anything, but my patrol car parked outside and a strange recording from my body cam. The video showed the empty basement, my flashlight flickering, and at one point, my own voice screaming in panic, but I was never seen again. The recording ends with the sound of the same woman's voice that called me that night. Please help me. I'm trapped. They're coming for me. I'm Detective Victor. and I haven't slept well in months. Every time I close my eyes, I see the bodies, the blood, the marks left by the surgeon. He was different from any other killer I've ever chased. It wasn't just his cruelty, but the precision, as if he treated his victims like works of art. 23 bodies, all mutilated the same way, with an X carved into their chests. It was as if he was signing his work, making it clear that this was personal. After months of investigating, we finally tracked him down to an abandoned house in the middle of the woods. It was a run-down old cabin, but he'd turned that place into his lair. When we broke in, we found him standing there, with his back to us, a bloody knife in his hand. No reaction when we surrounded him. He just slowly turned around and gave that unsettling smile, as if he had been waiting for us all along. "You think you can stop me?" he said. His voice was calm, almost playful. We arrested him right there. There was no resistance, no attempt to escape. Just that creepy smile. We took him to the station, but during the interrogation, he refused to say anything. No matter how hard we pressed, he just smiled. It started driving me crazy. It was like he knew something we didn't. That night, we left the surgeon in an isolation cell. It wasn't my first time dealing with killers, but this guy, he was different. Even after he was locked up, I couldn't relax. I spent the night at the station, going over the evidence, the photos of the bodies, trying to find something I might have missed. In the morning, I was called in a hurry. The surgeon had been found dead in his cell. I won't lie, my first reaction was relief. But what I saw in that cell made my stomach churn. He was lying on his back, with an X carved into his own chest, just like he did to his victims. No one had entered or left the cell during the night. The security cameras showed nothing unusual. It was as if he had done it all by himself. But how the hell could someone mutilate themselves like that? We spent days trying to understand what happened. No explanation made sense. The only clear thing was that the nightmare was over. Or at least that's what I wanted to believe. A week later, everything changed. We received a call about another murder. Same pattern. Another victim with an X carved into their chest. The same brutality. Right away, I thought it was an imitator. Someone wanting to gain notoriety by copying the surgeon. But when I got to the crime scene and saw the security footage, my blood ran cold. The camera had captured an image. It was him, the surgeon. That same smile, walking calmly through the crime scene. I knew it didn't make sense. He was dead. I had seen the body myself. But there was no denying what was on the footage. I rushed back to the station and started reviewing old files, photos from previous crime scenes. That's when I saw it. In every single photo, there he was, always in the background, always watching. Photos from cases in the 80s, 90s, always the same figure. The surgeon. The next few weeks were hell. More bodies began to surface, all with the same pattern. Nobody understood how this was possible. My boss wanted answers, but what could I say? It's the ghost of the killer? That wouldn't fly. I started to question if I was going insane. The last scene was the most disturbing. When I arrived, the victim was already there, with the X on their chest. But there was something different. On the floor next to the body was a message written in blood. "I'm always watching." The cameras captured the figure of the surgeon once again, but this time he looked directly at the camera before disappearing into the darkness. I feel like he's playing with us, with me. I don't know how he does it, but one thing is certain. He's never gone. And now, I'm waiting for his next move because somehow, I know he's chosen me as his next target. And I don't know if I'm ready for this.